You walk into a restaurant. Maybe it's a casual Friday night. You're not really trying to spend a lot. You just want a decent meal and to not feel guilty about it afterward. You sit down, the server hands you the menu, and you open it up. And immediately, without even meaning to, your eyes are drawn to this one dish. It's not the cheapest thing on there. It's not the most expensive either. It's sort of in the middle. And something about it just feels right, feels reasonable, feels like the smart pick. You order it, you don't really question it. Why would you? You made a choice, you feel fine about it, and you move on with your evening. But here's what you probably didn't realize in that moment. That feeling of, this seems reasonable, wasn't an accident. It was engineered, deliberately, by someone who spent a lot of time thinking about how your eyes move across a page, how your brain weighs options, and how to make a $34 on a tray feel like the responsible middle ground decision, even though 6 months ago you would have winced at spending that much on a single plate of food. My name is Sam, and I honestly spend way too much time thinking about this stuff. The psychology behind money, the invisible architecture of everyday decisions, and why even smart, financially aware people consistently make choices that quietly drain their wallets without them ever noticing. Not because they're careless, not because they don't care about money, but because the environments where we spend money are specifically designed to override our better judgment. And today I want to talk about one of the most elegant, most sneaky, and honestly most fascinating tricks in that playbook. Something called the decoy effect. Because once you understand it, you'll start seeing it absolutely everywhere. In restaurants, in streaming service pricing, in popcorn sizes at the movie theater, in software subscriptions, in wine lists, everywhere. And more importantly, you'll start catching yourself mid-decision, mid-menu, mid-checkout page, and you'll actually be able to push back. That's the goal today. Not to make you paranoid, not to turn every meal into a game theory exercise, but to give you a real usable lens on why your brain so consistently reaches for the option that someone else wanted you to pick. Setting the stage. What is the decoy effect? Let's start from the beginning because the decoy effect is one of those things that sounds almost too simple to be as powerful as it is. Here's the basic idea. When you're choosing between two options, you make a pretty rational comparison. Option A costs less but gives you less. Option B costs more but gives you more. You weigh them, you think about what you actually need, and you pick one. Simple. But now imagine someone introduces a third option, option C. And option C is priced similarly to option B, but it's noticeably worse than option B in an obvious way. Suddenly, option B doesn't just look good, it looks like a steal. Like a no-brainer, like the obvious choice. And the fascinating thing is, option B didn't actually change. Its price is the same. Its value is the same. Nothing about it changed. All that changed is the context it's sitting in. That third option, that's the decoy. Its entire job is not to be chosen. Its job is to make option B look irresistible by comparison. The psychologists who formally identified this, Joel Huber, John Payne, and Christopher Puto, back in the early 1980s, called it asymmetric dominance. Which is kind of a mouthful, so most of us just call it the decoy effect. And what they found was genuinely surprising to the economics world at the time, because it violated something called the independence of irrelevant alternatives. This classical economic assumption that says adding a new option to a choice set shouldn't change your preference between the original options, except it absolutely does. Reliably, predictably, and at scale. And the reason it works so well is that your brain isn't actually very good at evaluating things in absolute terms. You're not walking into a restaurant with a clear, preformed idea of what a fair price for pasta is. You're comparing constantly. You're looking at option A relative to option B relative to option C, and whoever designs the menu understands this far better than most of us would like to admit. The popcorn experiment, where this gets really real. Let me give you the example that I think makes this click the hardest, because it involves popcorn, and popcorn is something that I think we can all relate to in the sense that we've all stood at a movie theater counter and felt slightly robbed by the experience. So imagine you're at the movies. There's a small popcorn. Yeah, let's say it's $3. There's a large popcorn. Let's say it's $7. You're looking at those two options. $3 feels okay for a snack. $7 feels like a lot. You're probably going to grab the small and call it a day. Now imagine the theater adds a medium option. It's $6.50. Okay, $6.50 for a medium, and the large is $7. You look at those two numbers and something happens in your brain. This little click, and suddenly $7 for the large doesn't feel like a lot. It feels like you'd be practically leaving money on the table not to get it. Why would you pay $6.50 for the medium when the large is only 50 cents more? The theater just sold you a $7 popcorn and you feel good about it. The medium was never meant to be purchased, it was placed there at that specific price point to make the large feel like an obvious upgrade. The medium is the decoy. And the beautiful, slightly infuriating thing about this is that your satisfaction with the purchase actually goes up. You don't feel duped. You feel smart. You feel like you spotted a deal. This is kind of remarkable when you think about it, because not only did the decoy make you spend more, it made you feel better about spending more. The manipulation didn't just extract money. It extracted money and left you feeling good. That's next level stuff. And the reason this works, by the way, goes deep into how human cognition actually operates. There's a concept called comparative evaluation. The idea that we're much better at assessing relative value than absolute value. Show someone a $7 popcorn in isolation, and they might hesitate. Show them a $7 popcorn next to a $6.50 popcorn that's clearly worse value, and suddenly $7 becomes the anchor point for reasonable, the restaurant menu, as a masterclass in manipulation. Okay, so now let's go back to that restaurant, because restaurant menus are honestly one of the richest examples of applied behavioral economics that exist in everyday life. Menu engineers, and yes, that's a real job, spend an enormous amount of time thinking about layout, language, anchoring, and the decoy effect. One of the most common tactics is the anchor dish. You've probably seen this. There's one item on the menu that's wildly expensive, like $85 for a steak or $70 for some seafood tower thing. And when you first see it, you maybe do a small double take. But then you look at the $38 pasta next to it, and you know what? $38 suddenly seems fine, even reasonable, even borderline responsible. That $85 item is almost certainly not the restaurant's bestseller. It's not there to be ordered constantly. It's there to recalibrate your sense of what's expensive. Once your brain has processed $85, everything south of that feels like it's in the normal range. You've been anchored. But the decoy effect takes this further. Because it's not just about one expensive anchor at the top, it's about strategic clustering of options in the middle where most people end up spending. A well-designed menu will often have a hero dish, the one the restaurant actually wants you to order. And nearby it, there'll be something that's priced similarly but offers noticeably less. Less protein, a smaller portion, fewer sides, whatever. It doesn't need to be dramatically worse. It just needs to be worse enough that the hero dish looks like the obvious choice. And here's the thing, you won't even register that you're being steered. The decision will feel completely natural, completely yours. You'll tell your friends you had the salmon and it was great, and you won't think about the fact that the slightly sad, overpriced pasta next to it on the menu existed specifically to make you pick the salmon. I find this stuff genuinely fascinating, partly because it reveals so much about the gap between how we think we make decisions and how we actually make decisions. We like to believe we're rational agents weighing costs and benefits. And sometimes we are. But in environments designed by professionals who understand psychology, we're often just following the path of least cognitive resistance. Streaming services and the subscription trap. Let's leave the restaurant for a second, because the decoy effect didn't stay in the food industry. It migrated into tech, into subscriptions, into basically every pricing page you've looked at in the last decade. Think about how streaming services, or really any SaaS product, present their pricing tiers. You've seen this 100 times. There's usually a basic plan, a standard plan, and a premium plan. And 9 times out of 10, the standard plan is priced in a way that makes the premium plan feel like the smart upgrade. Let me give you a rough example. Basic plan. $9 per month, one screen, no downloads. Premium plan. $18 per month, 4 screens, downloads, everything. Standard plan. $15 per month, 2 screens, no downloads. Now look at the gap between standard and premium. You're paying $3 more, just $3, for 2 extra screens and download access. If you have a family, or if you travel, or if you even occasionally watch on more than one device, you're going to feel like you'd be foolish not to go premium. The standard plan exists partly as a decoy to make premium feel like a sensible upgrade rather than a luxury. This is deliberate. The companies that build these pricing pages have A/B tested them relentlessly. They know which price points and tier configurations generate the highest average revenue per user. And the decoy, that middle option, is almost always a key piece of the puzzle. And the wild thing is, you'll often see this in reverse too. Sometimes there's a stripped down basic option that's clearly too limited to be useful. It's there not to be chosen either, but to anchor the middle option as reasonable by making it seem way more capable by comparison. So you've got decoys working from both directions. One making the premium feel worth it, one making the basic feel insufficient. And the middle option, or in some cases the higher of 2 options, sits there looking perfectly reasonable in between. It's a lot. Once you see it, you genuinely cannot unsee it. The Economist study. A real-world case. I want to pause here and tell you about a study that Dan Ariely, behavioral economist and author of Predictably Irrational, conducted using subscription options from The Economist magazine. Because this one is almost too clean an example to be real, and yet it happened. The Economist was offering 3 subscription options. Web only, $59. Print only, $125. Print and web, $125. Wait, read that again. Print only was $125. Print and web, meaning you get more, was also $125 at the same price. Ariely's students looked at this and kind of laughed. Who would ever choose print only? Nobody. And they were right. In the study, nobody chose print only. But here's the thing. When Ariely removed the print only option, that weird, obviously bad middle choice, and just offered web only at $59 or print and web at $125, the distribution of choices shifted dramatically. More people chose the $59 web only option. The print only option wasn't there to be chosen. It was there to make print and web look like an absolute steal. When it was gone, the cheaper option suddenly looked a lot more attractive again. The Decoy had been doing invisible work the whole time. Work that only became visible when it was removed. This is one of my favorite studies in behavioral economics because it demonstrates so clearly that our choices are not made in a vacuum. They're made in context, and that context can be shaped, nudged, and engineered by whoever is presenting the options. Think about how many pricing pages you've encountered. Think about how many menus. Think about how many times you've looked at 3 options and instinctively felt like the middle or upper middle one was the smart choice. How many of those feelings were genuinely yours? And how many were quietly installed by someone who understood exactly how your brain would process the layout? Real estate, car dealerships, and the big ticket game. The decoy effect isn't just for small purchases. It scales up dramatically. Real estate agents have known about this intuitively for decades, even if they didn't always call it by its academic name. There's an old practice, sometimes called showing a setup property, where an agent shows a buyer a house that's slightly overpriced and clearly not right for them, before showing them the house the agent actually wants them to consider. After the mediocre option, the real target looks better. More spacious. More reasonably priced, more like a home. Car dealerships do something similar. When you sit down at a dealership and the salesperson starts walking you through trim levels, you're being given a tour of decoys. The base trim is stripped down in specific, noticeable ways. No heated seats, no backup camera, that kind of thing. The top trim is priced at a level that makes you feel like you'd be overdoing it. And the middle to upper trim? It hits that sweet spot where you feel like you're being smart and getting a real value upgrade without going overboard. The add-ons work the same way. A $400 floor mat package suddenly seems reasonable when you're signing a $35,000 car. The absolute scale of the car purchase has recalibrated your sense of what amounts of money are significant. This is sometimes called the contrast effect, and it works hand in hand with decoy pricing to systematically extract more from every transaction. And look, I'm not saying car salespeople are evil or that restaurant owners are bad people. Most of them are just using tools that work. That's how business functions, but you and I, as the people on the other side of those transactions, have a responsibility to understand what those tools are and how they operate. Because the alternative is just to keep quietly overspending, feeling like you made reasonable choices, and wondering at the end of every month where your money actually went. The psychology underneath. Why your brain falls for this. Let's go one level deeper because I think it's worth really understanding why this works. Not just that it works, but the specific cognitive mechanisms that make us so susceptible to it. The first is something called context dependence. Your brain doesn't evaluate options independently. It evaluates them relative to each other. There's a famous visual illusion where 2 identical shades of gray look dramatically different depending on what surrounds them. One looks almost white, the other looks almost black. Your financial judgment works the same way. A $25 appetizer looks fine on a menu full of $40 entrees. It would look outrageous on a menu full of $10 dishes. The second mechanism is loss aversion, first described by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. The pain of missing out on a good deal, of paying $6.50 for the medium popcorn when the large is only 50 cents more, actually registers in the brain as a kind of loss. you're not just drawn toward the better value option. You're avoiding the psychological pain of feeling like you made the irrational choice. The decoy works partly by making the non-decoy option the one that loss aversion steers you toward. The third is cognitive load. You walked into that restaurant after a full day. You're maybe a little tired, you're hungry, you're in conversation with people you care about. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for careful, deliberate reasoning, is not running at full power. And in that lowered effort state, your brain leans heavily on heuristics, on shortcuts, well, the middle option is usually a safe bet. Decision fatigue is real, and menu designers know it. And the fourth, and maybe the most important, is what I think of as the illusion of agency. The decoy effect doesn't feel like manipulation because you still made the choice. Nobody forced you to order the salmon. You looked at the menu, you deliberated, you decided. The fact that the deliberation was conducted in a carefully designed environment that steered you toward a predetermined outcome doesn't register as manipulation. It registers as a decision. Your decision. And that feeling of ownership over the choice makes you less likely to question it afterward. This is what makes it so much more sophisticated than just raising prices. Raising prices makes you feel bad. The decoy effect makes you feel good. You feel smart. You feel like you navigated the options well. Meanwhile, the restaurant got the outcome it wanted. How this shows up in your everyday life. Okay, let's bring this back to ground level. Because I think it's easy to hear all this and think of it as this abstract thing that happens in fancy restaurants or tech company pricing meetings, not in your actual everyday financial life. But it really is everywhere. When you order coffee and the barista asks if you want a small, medium, or large, and the large is only 30 cents more than the medium, that's a version of this. When you're shopping online and there are 3 versions of a product, and the middle version has reviews that praise its great value for the price, and the lower version has reviews that say it does a job but nothing special. The framing of those reviews has become a decoy structure. When a gym offers a basic membership, a standard membership, and an all-access membership, and the standard membership is priced in a way that makes all access feel like just a small upgrade. That's the decoy effect at work. When you're buying a phone and the 256 gigabyte model is $799, and the 512 gigabyte model is $849. $50 for double the storage. The 512 becomes almost a psychological inevitability. The 256 gigabyte model is doing decoy work. And here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. None of these individual decisions are catastrophic. 30 extra cents on a coffee, $50 more on a phone, a few extra dollars on a streaming subscription. None of these will ruin your finances alone. But the decoy effect isn't a single event in your life. It's a pattern. It runs constantly across hundreds of small and medium-sized decisions every single year. And those small, reasonable upgrades and middle ground choices accumulate into a meaningful chunk of money. Money that you spent not because you truly needed more, but because the choice architecture you were operating in made more feel like the only sensible option. That's why this matters. Not because you need to white-knuckle every menu, but because awareness is the first, most powerful form of resistance. Practical ways to push back. So what do you actually do with all this? First, and I think most importantly, pause before you upgrade. Anytime you find yourself reasoning that the next tier up is only a little more for a lot more, treat that as a trigger. That's often the exact sentence that the decoy was designed to produce. It doesn't mean the upgrade is always wrong. Sometimes it genuinely is good value, but give yourself 2 seconds to ask, do I actually need this extra? Or does it just feel irrational not to take it? Second, evaluate options independently before comparing them. Before you look at a menu or pricing page as a whole, decide roughly what you're willing to spend. Not down to the dollar, just a rough sense. Walking in with even a vague anchor of your own makes you much less susceptible to having someone else's anchor installed. Third, be especially wary of 3-option pricing structures. 2 options are usually a genuine choice. 3 options often include a decoy. When you see 3 tiers, the middle or upper middle one is frequently the hero the company wants you to choose. That doesn't make it wrong, but it's worth asking whether you actually want it or just feel steered toward it. Fourth, separate the absolute value from the relative value. Instead of asking, is the large popcorn worth 50 cents more than the medium? Ask, is the large popcorn worth $7 to me? Strip out the comparison and just ask whether you'd be comfortable making that purchase in isolation. And fifth, and this is maybe the most useful long-term habit, start noticing the decoys. Not obsessively, not to the point where you're mentally exhausted at every purchase, but just as a quiet background practice. Over time, pattern recognition builds up, and what used to feel like a natural, obvious choice starts to feel a little more manufactured, a little more visible. And once you can see the mechanism, it loses a lot of its power. Here's what I want you to take away from all of this. You are not a bad decision maker. You're not irrational or financially undisciplined. The fact that the decoy effect works on you doesn't mean there's something wrong with your brain. It means your brain is operating exactly as human brains do. We are comparative creatures. We navigate the world through contrast and context. That's not a flaw. It's actually deeply adaptive in most situations. But we live in a world where that very feature of human cognition is being leveraged professionally and deliberately to shape our spending. The menus we read, the pricing pages we scroll through, the dealership floors we walk across, these are not neutral environments. They are designed. And they're designed by people who have studied, tested, and refined how to make you feel like you're making the smart choice while spending more than you intended. The power of knowing this isn't that it makes you cynical. It's that it gives you a little bit of space. A pause. A quiet moment between being presented with options and making your choice where you can ask, is this really what I want? Or is this what the menu wanted me to want? That pause is worth more than any single meal or subscription or phone storage tier. Because once you start exercising it, you're not just making better individual decisions. You're rebuilding the habit of actually choosing, rather than just being guided to the predetermined destination. And that habit, compounded across years of meals and purchases and subscriptions and upgrades, that's the kind of thing that makes a real difference. Not dramatic, not overnight, but steady and real. So next time you open a menu and your eyes find that middle option that just feels right, take a breath, maybe smile a little, and ask yourself if that feeling is yours. It might be. But now at least you'll know to check.